All right, good evening. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, should I yell louder, Janet?
Yes, please,
Okay.
Michael.
Perfect. Excellent. Thank you so much for joining us this evening here in person at the Johnson County Library Central Resource Branch, and for everyone online. Thank you for taking time out of your evening to join us for Veto Session 2023. What to expect and what to do next. We have an amazing panel of experts and advocates here with us this evening. And I just want to say, first of all, my name is Michael Popa. I am the executive director at Mainstream Coalition, and we are excited to be here with our friends and partners from the League of Women Voters, who are co-sponsoring the event this evening. Let's see. So I just want to take a second then and go over kind of what to expect this evening. The first half of our program will focus on key issues that will be addressed during the veto session. And then the second half, we're going to focus on ways that you can engage with the advocates here up on the panel, with their organizations, and in other ways with your legislators. And then we're going to make your voice heard. We'll have time at the end for questions. So if you have a question here in person, there should be some note cards on your seats and a pencil. If not, please raise your hand. We'll get some over to you. Go ahead and jot down your question. A volunteer, just hold it up. A volunteer will be around to pick up your question. We're going to try to get to as many of those as possible this evening. If you're online, please put your question in the chat. Again, it will be given to our moderator, and we're going to try to get through as many questions as possible. To that end, I'm going to be quiet now to give as much time as possible to our panelists and turn it over to Danielle Keller, who is the advocacy co-chair from the League of Women Voters, who will be moderating this evening. Danielle.
Thank you, Michael. Can you hear me? All right. The League is a nonpartisan organization, which means we do not support or oppose political parties or candidates. Now that that is out of the way, I'm excited to introduce you to our exceptional panelists. We have Donovan Dillon from Loud Light, Aaron Woods from 6 Degrees of Activism, Taryn Jones from Equality Kansas, and Eileen Berquist from the ACLU. We're just going to go ahead and jump right in. So Aaron, what can we expect related to public education during the veto session?
Well, there's not a lot for the governor to veto, as they have not actually come up with. Oh, thank you. Okay. Okay, so not a lot for her that's been vetoed. Is this working? No. Right up. Can you hear me now? Now.
Take that one from her. The one that's not working.
Did this one work?
It did.
This one is working.
It should have.
You can hear me.
I can hear you. I don't know. Is it coming over?
Before.
Oh.
Hello.
Can everyone hear?
Can this seem to be working? Not working. Okay, I'll just try to talk loud. Okay.
Yeah, let's have her go up to the podium mic, because that one actually is working.
More nervous than I was. Okay, can you hear me now? Okay, so basically, one of the main things to know is not a lot has happened with education. A lot has been happening throughout the session, but nothing has really been finalized at this point, and we have 3 days left. So I think right off the bat, I just want to make sure if you're going to walk away with anything, that you walk away knowing that you should contact your legislators and get your friends and neighbors and family to contact your legislators as soon as possible, and just let legislators know that they should pass a clean funding bill that abides by Gannon, that fully funds special education and rejects vouchers and bad policies. Those are 3 main things you need to know right now. So those are basically the things we've been dealing with all session long. So here we are, 3 days left, no resolution on any of them. And as of a few hours ago, it appears they're going to start to renegotiate the K through 12 budget under a new bill number. It looks to be HB 2089. So as you're out there looking for alerts and things, that might be something to look for. So really, I mean, things can get a little scary at this point when legislators are under a lot of pressure to come up with an agreement, when they don't have a lot of time to vet different proposals that are put forward. When this is, education is a large part of the state budget. So we really, 3 days it's critical to be paying attention. So in theory, it should be as simple as adhering to those 3 things that I just talked about. But things aren't always easy in Topeka, especially with the makeup of the legislature that we have right now. So as for that first item of abiding by the Gannon Supreme Court case settlement, that ruled that our schools were underfunded, that should be easy. Oh. Right. Now I feel okay. How's that? Oh, yay. This is fun. Okay. So as far as Gannon, just to give, just a little bit of history on that. So, Gannon Supreme Court case happened a while ago, ruled that our schools were underfunded. So in theory, this year it should be easy to follow Gannon. With this most recent school year, the multi-year phase-in of education budget increases required by Gannon is complete. So for the first year in over a decade, general education funding has finally been restored to 2009 levels, adjusted for inflation. So after years of cuts due to the recession and Brownback tax experiments. So going forward, to abide by the Gannon settlement simply requires the legislature to do annual adjustments for inflation. So in the initial budget that was introduced, the budget bill that was introduced this year, Gannon was being adhered to. But a few hours before the regular session ended a couple weeks ago, the conference committee made some last minute changes to the school finance formula. And the Department of Education calculated very quickly, thankfully, that the changes would cut funding by $215 million. So thankfully that bill did not make it to the floor for a vote. There did not seem to be support for it at the time, but again, we got 3 days. Legislators are going to want to get out of Topeka, and we really need to just stress to them that they need to abide by the Gannon settlement. We don't want to find ourselves back in court either. So that's an important one. And then as for fully funding special education, that should be another one that should be easy this year, in theory. So by law, the state is obligated to cover 92% of excess special education costs. But this obligation, the state hasn't been meeting it since 2012. So districts are mandated to, or I should say, that current shortfall that we have right now is $160 million. So, and districts are mandated by law to provide special education costs. So to cover that shortfall in sped funding, they must pull dollars from their general operating budgets to cover those costs. And that has continued to undermine that restoration of funding that we saw from Gannon. So that impacts the education of all kids. So special education kids who have special education services, kids who don't, really everyone. So but the good news is the state currently has a surplus of $3 billion. So there's never been a better time to fully fund special education. And the governor has created a roadmap to fully funding special education in her proposed budget. So that makes it pretty easy. She has a 5-year phase-in to get the state to that 92% of excess costs that they're obligated to. And in her budget, that's she's allocated close to $75 million for the first year. So, but again, as easy as that sounds, the education committee leadership has continued to refuse to simply add even that first year of funding to the budget, even as of meetings that were held today. It was tried again by some legislators, and they would not agree to it. So instead, they've been trying to kind of take that sped funding and use it as leverage to pass vouchers or other bad policy that they want to push through. So that brings us to our third component of our messaging we want to get to our legislators, which is reject vouchers and other bad policy. Throughout this session, we've seen the Education Committee leadership try to push through multiple versions of voucher plans. So we expect to see them to continue that in the next 3 days. And they've used various names for these programs that all sound nice: Education Savings Account, Sunflower Education Equity Act. But in reality, their vouchers, despite the fact that they don't want to call them that, they divert our public tax dollars to private schools that can choose which students they accept or don't want to accept. And many of this year's voucher programs would also give public tax dollars to homeschools. Leadership continues to refuse to add any accountability measures to these programs that use our public tax dollars. So, and then just one other note is there's just simply not a need in Kansas. We already have a voucher program that was put into place, I think, in 2014. And that program, they always tout that low-income students should have the same, should be able to attend private schools just like actually have that choice or whatever, wealthier students. So we have that program in place, tax credit scholarship program. It's eligible for kids who are eligible for free and reduced lunch. So only 1,340 students are currently receiving scholarships under that program. There are still over 230,000 eligible students. Yet they want to try to expand the programs to increase that eligibility, which basically is just expanding to families who can already afford tuition and essentially using public tax dollars to subsidize their tuition. Expansion will really not help those low-income students as now there's more students available for the private schools to choose from. Those kids can just get passed by even more. So just in summary about vouchers, they kind of do nothing to ensure that all children will receive an adequate education. There's no guarantee that they can enroll in a private school, that they'll be accepted. There's no standards for curriculum. There's no requirements for teachers' qualification, testing, reporting of outcomes, or finances. So we want to make sure that they reject vouchers. And then there's also a couple policy items that they've been trying to push through in special education as well, such as there's a so-called parent portal that's a public facing on the public website, but parents already have access to a portal, password protected, for if they're a parent of a student in the school, they have that already. And then also allowing homeschool students to participate in public school sports teams and other activities where they wouldn't have to, follow the codes of conduct that KSHA requires or academic requirements and things like that. So I didn't really check my time, sorry.
All right, thank you so much, Erin. Eileen, we're gonna go to you next with a two-part question. Can you first just give us an overview of what veto session is? And then second, Kansas sent a strong message last August about reproductive rights. What is the legislature doing with respect to reproductive rights?
Those are two very big questions. So first of all, I wanted to thank the League and Mainstream for organizing this today. The ACLU has worked with both organizations in the State House and communities in the courthouse too, a couple of times on voting rights issues, and they've just been really incredible partners. So thank you for putting this together and inviting us to be involved. I think what my fellow panelists illustrated very well was, in spite of common sense and what normal people would expect, the legislature doesn't always do what you would want them to. So as she was saying, there is a court decision saying that they have to adequately fund Kansas schools, and yet we aren't quite sure how that's going to happen. So just a quick show of hands. Who knows what veto session is? Okay, so it's a pretty good number, but we'll give a quick overview just in case there's some people who aren't quite comfortable with that. But I want to lead in by saying that this veto session is very different than normal. because this legislative session has been very different than normal. There has been a truly staggering number of bills introduced, and the percentage of bills that are attacking civil liberties has been staggering as well. We always say that legislative session is like drinking from a fire hose. This has been that in many, many ways. So everything from abortion to anti-election bills, voter suppression bills, school vouchers, and a whole host of bills attacking the LGBTQ community. And this isn't random. We know that this is coming from a lot of national think tanks. A lot of people from out of state have come to testify on these bills, whether it be voter suppression bills, abortion bills, what have you. And there's been a very strong coalition of organizations that have worked from day one this session up until now to keep these bills from becoming law. So at this point in legislative session, we have taken that deluge of bills and we have winnowed it down to a few. And a couple of weeks ago, we had conference committees where both chambers, the House and the Senate, got together and argued late into the night, a couple of days in a row. I'm still catching up on sleep about whose version of the bill is going to pass, who's going to get where, etc. Then we had a nice break, and now we're at veto session. So during that break, Governor Kelly spent some time looking at those bills and hearing from advocates and people in the community and her own party, and decided which bills she was going to sign. So we have her endorsement to, which bills she was going to not sign. So not give her endorsement to, but they still become law, and which bills she is going to veto. Now we have 3 days starting tomorrow, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. I'm already hearing we're going to be late into the night, Thursday and Friday this week. So drink some coffee and popcorn and watch from home on YouTube. And during those days, we are going to be working around the clock to try to sustain those vetoes. To override a gubernatorial veto in Kansas, you have to have a 2/3 majority of both chambers. So in the House, that's 84 votes. In the Senate, that's 27. We just need to keep the people we have and flip 1 or 2 on a lot of these bills. Some of them, when they passed the first time around, had really good numbers, so we're not as worried about them. Others, we're not going to know up until the last minute, and that's part of the joy of veto session. And part of the stress is if anyone tells you they know the outcome of this week, they're selling you a bill of goods. This no one knows. Legislative leadership doesn't know. So going to the second question, now that we've kind of done a level set, what is a veto session? How did we get here? What to expect? We have a certain number of bills. Unfortunately, scheduling didn't allow someone from Planned Parenthood or Urge or Trust Women to be here. Those are the organizations that are statewide handling reproductive issues. ACLU we take our guidance from them, but I have been working with them closely. So I'm happy to share a little bit about the bills at the State House that have touched on abortion. Talking about winnowing it down, there were a lot of anti-abortion bills introduced this session. And as pretty much everyone in this room and online knows, the people of Kansas decided, full stop, that they want to keep the right to bodily autonomy just last summer. That right to bodily autonomy includes the right to abortion. So this is something that the voters decided, and it's pretty staggering, even in a lot of districts that many consider to be conservative. We have people say, no, don't change the Constitution. I may not agree with abortion, you may not agree with abortion, but it's not our right to choose for someone else what they should do with their body. In spite of that, we have seen a lot of bills introduced that are chipping away around the edges of abortion rights. So we're not going head on. We're not saying a lot of the bills that we've seen even 5 years ago that would have tried to limit access, like cutting down the number of weeks or that sort of thing. We've seen a lot of attacks on funding. And the 2 bills that we're ending up with during veto session have to do with some really serious and dangerous misinformation about how abortion is actually conducted in Kansas, and medically what can be done if you have a medication abortion. So The first one I would like to talk about is HB 2264. There are a few different provisions in this bill, but the one that is mostly concerning for reproductive rights advocates would require abortion providers to share misinformation about mifepristone, and would create criminal penalties for healthcare providers who do not share that information with patients. So the information they would like shared that is incorrect is that after taking the abortion pill, mifepristone, it could be reversed. So they are creating this scenario where a woman decides to not continue her pregnancy. She takes the pill, has a moment to change her mind, and they want to tell these patients that it could potentially be reversed. There is one study that they are pulling this information from, and it has been largely debunked. Some people have indicated that there may even be a health concern having to do with hemorrhaging associated with attempting to intervene after this pill has been taken. So this bill is not only creating a penalty, criminal penalty for healthcare providers if they decide not to share misinformation to their patients. It's spreading that beyond just that patient-doctor relationship and spreading it out to the community. A lot of people have a lot of questions about this now. Well, it's being talked about in the legislature. Isn't it true then? So that's a really, really big concern for a lot of folks if this becomes law, and a lot of people in danger. The other bill is HB 2313, and I hesitate to use the title that is used for this bill because it is incredibly, again, misleading, but that is the so-called Born Alive bill. The way that this is messaged to people makes it sound like no person with a heart would vote against it. They're saying that if during the course of an abortion, there somehow is a live baby, that baby must be kept alive, despite what the person carrying the child may have wanted, despite their wishes, despite what the doctor said, despite everything. I think it was Trust Women who said in their testimony against this bill, and they've been around a very long time as an abortion provider in the state, never once in their history has this ever happened. This doesn't happen. And yet, we are creating an environment where we are going to penalize people, healthcare providers, provide a course of action within the legal system, specifically to make the abortion space more uncomfortable, to give people questions, to make it less accessible for people to get an abortion, because the more legal hurdles, the more legal challenges and threats you put in people's way, the less likely it is that people will be able to get the care that they need. So the theme of the two bills that we are hoping will be sustained is misinformation. Misinformation in pursuit of chipping away at our right to bodily autonomy that is guaranteed under the Kansas Constitution, that you as voters, many of you, I think it was 60%, so maybe 60% of this room, not sure the demographics of where we're sitting right now, it's Johnson County, decided that you wanted to keep. And they are doing this in full knowledge that their voters made that decision. So we're going to be working for the next few days on those bills, and many others actually are working with 2 out of 3 panelists pretty regularly on lots of group chats. So if you have questions about veto session, I'll happily stay around, and also supporting questions about the abortion bills should you have them.
Thank you so much, Eileen. With that, we'll turn it over to Taryn. What LGBTQ+ equality issues can we expect to see this week?
So this week in veto session, Governor Kelly, I believe it was last week, vetoed 4 anti-LGBTQ bills, mostly anti-trans bills. And I can kind of give you an overview of those. SB 180, which is titled the Women's Bill of Rights, which is a joke because one of the senators during this bill asked if they could put increased pay for women, and the chair of the committee told her that wasn't relevant to the bill. I'm not sure how increased pay for women is not part of a Women's Bill of Rights, but apparently it is. So what this bill does is define biological sex in terms of two genders, so either male or female, and it's whatever you are born at birth. They did eventually get a carve out for intersex individuals. We had a lot of people testify on this bill talking about how this marginalized, an already marginalized community, and it kind of collateral in that. So they didn't do it in a great way. They decided to define intersex people as disabled so that they could get this passed because people had a problem with intersex. One thing it does is it carves out entities it requires entities to collect data like vital statistics as male or female. And it defines these things at birth in certain spaces, including athletics, prisons, domestic violence shelters, locker rooms, and bathrooms. And to be honest, we don't really know what the effects of this bill are because it's so broad. You know, are we going to be able to change gender markers after this? Are we going to be able to do driver's license changes? We don't know because the bill is so broad. And I don't think even the people who supported this bill know. And then next up is SB 26, which is considered the child mutilation prevention. This allows people who have had gender reassignment surgery that were under 18 bring a civil suit against a doctor up until 3 years after their 18th birthday. Okay. Just had to turn it off and on again, like all technology. So this, and that includes anything from surgery to testosterone and estrogen to puberty blockers. And puberty blockers are something that a lot of people don't know about, but they're an essential part of trans healthcare because when you're young, you can take puberty blockers and that will prevent puberty until you can use things like that. You can get things like testosterone and estrogen. This bill, again, as I was reviewing it earlier today, has a carve out for intersex people. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, anyone, but I believe this is retroactive. I think I was reading it and it's retroactive to like, so if you are still 21 and you had this done 3 years ago, you know, within the last 3 years, you can still sue. So I will have to double check on that, but I'm pretty sure that's true. HB 2138 is the overnight accommodations bill, and this is basically for schools. They require school districts to adopt a policy on separate overnight accommodations by the sex that you are assigned at birth. And then what happens when you don't, basically what they require as school districts to do this, and if they're not willing to do this or there's some kind of cause of action where they haven't done it, you can bring a civil action against the school year. It must be initiated within 2 years of when the event happened. The last one I have is SB 228. And it's a bill regarding money for county jail. So the first part of this bill really just talks about money with county jails and different aspects of county jails and how they work. But they snuck in a little portion of this to that says prisoners would be required to be in separate rooms according to their biological sex at birth. And this one, it does not seem like there is any provisions for intersex people, so I don't know how that's going to affect intersex people.
All right, thank you so much. Donovan, what bills can we expect to see come up with regards to voting rights?
Yeah, so I have lost countless hours of sleep this legislative session. But thankfully, not too many of them have been around voting rights. As it currently stands, there is one bill that has currently been vetoed by the governor, I think this past week. SB 209, which seeks out to eliminate the 3-day grace period, which is what basically if your mail-in ballot is postmarked by election day, it has like 3 days to get in and get counted. And this would be eliminating that measure. Interesting enough, this measure was implemented in 2017 almost unanimously across both chambers. I think there was one vote against it between the Senate and the House. And that was under all by Republicans. So in my conversations in the state house, it's been really interesting trying to see them go back on something that they instituted when there have been no changes to the mail infrastructure in our state, which is pretty awful. In regards to mail-in voting, we don't have any mail sorting centers in Kansas. So if you are sending in anything, including a ballot, it has to go out of the state before it comes back in. And a big issue around this bill that we've seen this session is that people like you and me who choose to send in their mail-in ballot and abide by the rules will be being punished for government inefficiency. I mean, the inefficiency of the post office. And I believe if this bill would have been instituted in the 2020 election, nearly 32,000 ballots wouldn't have been casted. And I mean, this has been an issue. I mean, me as a college voter, I have plenty of packages that have been lost in our mail sorting centers, people in rural districts, elderly people, and working class people. And thankfully, this bill does not have a veto-proof majority. I think it was 74 people voted for in the House, and I think they need 84. Yeah. So that is looking pretty good. Yeah, and that's pretty much my update on voting.
All right, thank you all so much. Now that we've been educated about all of these things that are going to be coming up this week, what do your organizations do to help constituents take effective action on these important issues? Eileen, we'll start with you.
I usually don't use a microphone because I'm told that I am too loud. So this is a little strange for me. At the beginning of every session, and unfortunately we're at the tail end, but for future reference for next December, I collaborate with our field department to put on a training. And in that training, we start with the basics of legislative session and how the bill becomes a law, not just what's in the procedure manual, but how it actually works. And then go through how you as an informed citizen can track these things on your own. The whole point of the training is to give everyday people the tools and the information they need so that they can decide, okay, this is an issue I care about, this is a committee or a bill I care about, this is how I'm going to follow it. So it's a lot of it is building skills and a more informed Kansas public. But then we'll also talk about our legislative priorities and how people can get engaged. One of the things that our field director has done this session is regular legislative drop-ins. So she'll just have people sign up specifically. She'll give a bit of training. She'll give them handouts, leave behinds, and prep them about how to speak with their legislators. And then she'll go up there and she'll be with them and debrief. And it's been a really wonderful thing to see. A lot of folks have taken advantage of it. And we hope that in the future, we'll be able to expand that. We also have emails. I know everyone gets emails and is probably sick of emails, but our emails, at least during session, are incredibly informative. We'll give you action alerts. Here are the bills that are our priorities. Here's why, and here's how you can get engaged. And a lot of the time we make it as easy as possible. I know all of our organizations do. We'll give you basic talking points, 1, 2, 3 points. Here's why it's important. Here's how it might negatively or positively impact Kansas, and here's how you can speak about it. Click this link and send an email, that sort of thing. We also have phone banks and that sort of thing. So there were lots of opportunities if you were interested in these, or if you have ideas, other ideas for how the ACLU can get engaged with the public better. You can just sign up on our website, aclukansas.org, and you'll be put on our list.
We can just go down the table, if that's fine with you guys.
All right, so Equality Kansas is mainly a lobbying organization. What we do is we fight and protect rights for the LGBTQ community. In the state house where they're lobbying against or for, in some rare instances.
I would.
LGBTQ bills, so we have a lobbyist who is there. And we don't have newsletters right now, but if you ever have any questions on bills, we post a lot of things on our Facebook pages. We have a main state page, and then we have different pages. For Johnson County, it would be Equality Kansas, Metro Kansas City. You can also email us at info@eqks.org, which is on the website that's on the sheet you guys have, or calling, we have a phone number, 913-229-6529. The other things we do is we work a lot with legislators not in the session, sorry, I'm tripping over my words. We put on in the past candidate, or not candidate, I should say legislative forums, so that people can get information about what's going on in the state house and what's happened the past legislative session. Sorry, this is my train of thought. I think that is it.
Sounds like it's working. So yeah, I just have a little group called 6 Degrees of Activism that really just started organically out of me realizing there was an issue I cared about at the time. It was the Affordable Care Act that was being overturned, and realizing, okay, I really do need to contact my legislator now. So I found that that was a nerve-wracking thing for me. I didn't know who to call, what to say, etc. So that sort of led to me thinking, I bet there's a lot of people just like me. So my whole goal with it is to make things as easy as possible for the average person, like most of our groups up here, to advocate for issues they care about. So, and then also the other thing with it was through working on PTA and stuff, when I really started realizing how important things at the state level are. So my other goal in it was to, I just kind of started out by informing, sending out emails and things to inform my friends on what was happening at the state level, and then providing them with action items. So it's kind of just grown, again, organically, friends and stuff like that, which is where that name came from, 6 Degrees. But anyway, so yeah, so that's pretty much what I do. And then so in the legislative session, very busy. I have a newsletter. I try to keep track of lots of things besides beyond public education, although that is probably where I heavily focus a lot of my time because I work with Game for Kansas Schools and Kansas PTA. But I relied a lot on these other organizations and their emails and the action items they put out. And so I sometimes try to kind of put it all into one sort of newsletter that I have. So I don't have a website. I basically have a newsletter that I run through Substack, and that I need to get a better name for that. I didn't really realize until today that it's just Erin, ERIN 723@substack.com. So I'll work on that. But so yeah, and then when the legislative session is over too, I work and try to get volunteers to help good candidates who support the issues that I care about and the people that I'm involved with care about, help get them into office. So coming up, we'll have school board elections will be something I'm very focused on, and all those local elections are very important. So it's another thing, just getting people to realize those are important, and voting is one of my other #1 things. So you can kind of, if you're interested, subscribe to my newsletter. I try my hardest to keep things up to date. In the next 3 days, I'll be working really hard, getting information out. As far as public education, I highly recommend you follow Game On for Kansas Schools on Facebook or Twitter. They will keep you up to date, and really up to date on those issues like vouchers and other things that impact our public schools. And they'll put out alerts. And so if you're looking for other groups to follow, for specific to public education, Kansas Association of School Boards on Twitter is great. And then two of their advocates, which are Leah Flighters and Scott Rothschild. If you want to kind of keep up to date over the next 3 days, timely updates, follow them on Twitter. And just one other thing I just wanted to point out, as we head into these elections coming up, be wary of postcards. We're already seeing some of the members of the legislature receive postcards saying, you'll see one side, you'll get some people getting postcards that say they supported only funding special education. And then other legislators are getting postcards already that say they voted against funding special education. So they're leaving out some truth in there. Turns out the people that you're getting the postcards that say they voted to support special education are only voting to support special education when it's tied to vouchers that are subsequently taking money from our public schools. On these standalone bills that have been, or bills or amendments, I should say, because there hasn't been a bill, but there have been a number of amendments put forth to just strictly fund special education. Those people have voted no on those bills. The people who are getting postcards that are saying that they voted against fully funding special education actually voted yes when it came to just fully funding special education with our vouchers. So just be wary, and if the postcard says American for Prosperity, just ignore it, throw it out. Anyways, that's my tip there. I just wanted to throw that in. So, okay, that's all I got.
Okay, there we go. So first, I just want to shout out two resources that we have at Cloudlight that I think are very awesome for the legislative session. First, we put out weekly videos that give a legislative recap on what's happening in the legislature. That is kind of a bite-sized information. They're really fun, and our founder creates those with our comms director, Paris. And I highly recommend watching them. It's a 5-minute videos that just goes on the important things that happened this week, because not everyone has the time to dedicate their lives to being in that building. Secondly, this legislative session, we implemented weekly, kind of bi-weekly lobby days that I thankfully got to help organize. And the kind of thought process behind that is that we see a lot of orgs doing big lobby days once a session, but we don't really see this constant presence within people on our side advocating and uplifting their own stories. So through those lobby days, we do them generally by location, and then we focus in on certain policy areas. We bring in folks from across the state to talk to their elected officials and leverage their stories, and that has been just amazing. I've met so many cool people across our state, and we've also directly seen people flip their votes on certain issues. So it really does matter, and I recommend for next session seeing you guys. Moving on, we have hosted a plethora of phone banks with other orgs around specific issues that typically target specific districts on specific bills, urging them to contact their legislatures because certain legislatures have a good response to hearing from their constituents. Some don't, but thankfully some do. And tonight, actually, I believe we were having one. I think it ends at 7, and it was around the anti-LGBTQ+ bills. And we likely will continue that in the future. And lastly, for folks under 35 or anyone that that's under 35, we are a youth-centered organization, and we are starting to implement what we call community action teams across the state. And what that serves as is a place for young and impacted people to have a political home and the resources to make change at a local level. We have those in Wichita, Southwest Kansas, Lawrence and Topeka, our group, and then the KC Metro. across the summer, we plan to do a lot of cool stuff around like voting rights, and just like equipping people with the resources they need to make change at a local level, because not everything happens in the state house. And sometimes talking to like your local officials, local county clerk can have a bigger impact on your area than your state officials. And then any other events can be found at www.loudlight.org/events.
Thank you all so much. Now we're going to turn to the Q&A portion of our event. And it looks like this is a quick time check. We have about 15 minutes for questions. So just a reminder, if you're here in the room, you can write your questions on postcards and our volunteers will collect them and bring them up to me. And if you're joining us on Zoom tonight, you can type your questions in the Q&A, and those will also, time permitting, we'll get through as many questions as we can. The first question, and this is Eileen, there's a request that you answer this one. SB 180 mentions state agencies. Are there any funding implications if it becomes law?
That is a really good question, and I believe Taryn expressed very well the just the lack of information we have about how SB 180 is going to impact the state. If you put into our statute a specific definition, and that definition has to be used by every agency, there are going to be implications. Some of those implications have to do with funding. So federal law, the federal government has specific requirements for specific grants that they share. So one easy example, our domestic violence and sexual assault centers across the state are funded. I believe the majority of the funding comes from federal money, from the Violence Against Women Act, and our Victims of Crime Act, so VAWA and VOCA, and both prohibit discrimination on the basis of gender and gender identity. I believe it was the executive director of the Kansas Coalition Against Sexual and Domestic Violence who spoke out specifically on this issue, not even bringing into account the civil rights violations against trans and gender diverse individuals, but just speaking specifically for a bill that says it is here to protect women, is about women's rights. It could severely endanger millions of dollars in funding for our victim advocacy programs across the state. There are also issues within the foster care system. So there's guidance around Title 4B, so that's family preservation funds, and Title 4E, foster care funds. There are requirements that you have supporting affirmation of child's gender identity, forcing that child to be in situations with their sex assigned at birth, as opposed to their gender identity, is not only going to be incredibly traumatizing for a child who is already in a very unstable situation, away from home. It's potentially going to put our funding at risk for those programs. And if all of you have been in Kansas a while, you know that we have some struggles with our foster care programs in this state. The last thing we need right now is to lose federal funding or have that put at risk. So those are just two organizations or funding streams that we know about, because this bill is so far-reaching. So if you are feeling uncomfortable or don't have the base knowledge to talk about how this impacts the LGBTQ community, there are so many different ways that this bill is very, very bad.
Our next question, how many of Kansas's 105 counties have private schools where children can make use of vouchers?
I think there are 65 counties without, either with or without private schools. But yes, this significantly impacts rural schools because there are many that do not have a private school option. So they're paying their tax dollars, and it is generally folks in Wichita and Johnson County area and Topeka that are benefiting from vouchers. So I believe it is 65.
65 that do not.
That's the part I can't remember. Okay, definitely 65. I think it's 65 that do not. I'm almost positive. Michael, somebody write this down.
We're doing
Okay.
the audio.
I got a thumbs up, sorry.
Someone is not. All right. Much of my current mail is not postmarked. How will this practice affect mail-in ballots?
So the thing that's like interesting about this bill is it's based in like election conspiracy theory that our elections aren't safe. And something that I'd like to point out is that even the Secretary of State was not for this bill, and I think drop boxes was like another one. Like there is bipartisan support across the board in saying that this bill is bad. And what it aims to solve are already things that are like illegal within like our election system. Like you can't like fiddle with like postmark dates like on a ballot. Like every instance where like election fraud would occur is already something that's illegal under our current laws within the state. We've had it from like election officials, from the Secretary of State to county clerks saying that like this isn't an issue. However, the legislature has again pushed this bill through against our wishes and the wishes of people who are put into office to handle our elections.
This next question is one that I don't really think we talked about tonight. But it asks, what is the current surplus and what, if any, plans exist to deal with it? I will say on the subject of veto session, there was the flat tax bill that was vetoed. And if you want to look that up, it's SB 169. I don't know if anyone else wants to talk about the surplus.
I can address it a little bit. Yeah, so there's at least a $3 billion surplus, and I believe just on Monday, new projected revenues came out, and I think we're looking at $4 billion. Then in the flat tax, I think the issues with that, the governor did veto that bill. I think one of the major concerns there, it was a kind of, it does significantly cut state revenues. So concerns about us going back to underfunded schools again, 4-day school weeks, which we saw in some of the counties. And it definitely benefits the wealthy more. So that's, I think, her major reservations on the flat tax. And I think this is the part I can't quite, I don't know the exact numbers, but she has proposed kind of a tax credit or refund. If anything, there might be something. Yeah, so giving money back to taxpayers through like a tax credit. So there are plans to help taxpayers out, but I think she's doing it in a way that would, or her suggestion is in a way that wouldn't necessarily benefit the wealthy more than others.
All right. This next one has 2 questions, so we're out of questions. So if anyone has more, hand to volunteer in the room or ask them. Okay. Okay. So this will be our last 2 questions. The first one, it just says Kelly veto of parents' rights bill sustained ? I don't know if anyone wants to talk on that. I think the bill number is HB 226.
I know the bill. So this is a tricky one because last year the ACLU and I believe Loud Life also worked in a coalition with Kansas Interfaith Action and a lot of teachers organizations to push back really, really strongly on the Parents' Bill of Rights. That was a bill that would have allowed parents to infringe upon the educational space and the educational curriculum of children other than their own. There were a lot of concerns about censorship for other people's children, etc. This year, let's say they neutered the bill a bit. So this bill basically says in law that a parent has the right to decide if a book or a particular lesson plan or something is inappropriate for their child based on their beliefs. So very different than last year. And it is currently already practiced in many schools that this happens. I like to tell a funny story about being in 4th grade. And my mom walked in on gym class and they were playing Shania Twain's Whose Bed Have Your Boots Been Under? While we were being taught line dancing and she was scandalized. And I was pulled out of that class. So, I mean, this is already happening. I do think that there are serious concerns still, but from what I remember of the vote count, that there's a pretty comfortable chance of sustaining the veto on this. And that won't change everyday Kansas parents' right to decide based on their religion, based on their personal beliefs, if something is appropriate or inappropriate. So I think we're feeling pretty good about that one. It hasn't been a priority this year for ACLU because it impacts the individual's child, not other people's children. But if at any point you want to know those numbers, those vote numbers, you can look up the bill number online on the KSLEG website, and you can see the whole vote history there. And as I said, they have to get 84 votes in the House and 27 in the Senate. So if it looks like they had 70 in the House, that's 14 votes to catch up on, and they would have to really want that. So
Yeah, it looks like I think that bill passed the House 76-46 and the Senate 23-17.
those are not great odds.
All right, and our last question, it just asked what's the status of the trans athlete bill in Kansas?
So unfortunately, Governor Kelly did veto that, and with the deadlines of when Governor Kelly vetoes things and when the House and Senate have to take those veto overrides back up, it did get a veto override in the House and the Senate before veto session, and unfortunately, we were not able to sustain the veto. So it looks like this is going to be law, I believe, in July, if I'm remembering correctly. So unfortunately, we all worked, I know all of us at the table worked really hard on this one, and unfortunately, we just were not able to sustain the veto.
Well, that wraps up our Q&A session. I would again just like to thank all of our panelists so much for their time. The League of Women Voters has one quick announcement. We would like to invite everyone to our next event. It is May 6th at 9:30 a.m. at the Sylvester Powell Community Center. And we are going to be discussing local issues and how you can get involved. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Michael to wrap us up for the night.
Danielle, thank you so much. Give Danielle another round of applause. All right, and to our panelists, thank you very much for being up here today to talk to us. I have to say, your inspirations. For real, your inspirations and watching you all work this session and being a part of that, it's an honor. And thank you for all the bills that you stopped that aren't in veto session. And that goes to everyone here too. Thank you for helping. Let's give them another round of applause. Ellen Bergman with ACLU, Taryn Jones with Quality Kansas, Aaron Woods with 6 Degrees of Activism, and Donovan, thank you. Donovan Dillon with Loud Light. I'm sorry. I just looked into those eyes and are we blank? All right, so as I mentioned, there's some very harmful bills, that are in the veto session, but there's some that didn't make it. And as the league says, democracy is not a spectator sport, and as mainstream always urges, do more than vote. And so to that end, we put together this list of resources. There should have been one in your seat. We'll walk through that really quickly. I know it looks self-explanatory, but I just kind of want to walk through this. So what can you do when you get home tonight? Right? What's the first thing you can do? Well, you can go to kslookup.org. You can look up your legislators by their address. You can see how they voted on the bills that we're tracking. We're tracking every single bill that we talked about up here tonight. You can also go and see their entire vote history. And you can do that for any legislator by district as well. And you get their contact information. Why do you need their contact information? Anyone? So you can contact them, right? Because we can't do this alone. We need you. And your dedication is apparent just by being here tonight and by being online. At the bottom of the page there, you'll see kslegislature.org. That is the official legislature website. There are things called calendars on there. And it's, if I remember correctly, this would be great if I could patch in here and show you online. But it's on the right. That's your left, but my right. So on your right. Yeah, there's something called calendar up on the top tabs. A calendar is what the legislature calls an agenda. So you can look it up for the Senate and for the House. You can see when they go into session. And you can look and see at least what they calendared to discuss, debate, or try to override that next day or when the calendar comes out. So take a look at that tonight.
And if you're viewing the paper on your phone or online, that link, if you just click kslegislature.org, actually goes straight to the calendars page. So you don't even need to do the extra step.
Thank you, Jay. Jay put this together. It will list bill, yeah, it'll list the bills by number and then something, there's a little short title. Yeah, there's a little short title there for you. So do that. See when the bills are calendared, at least when they're calendared right now, so you know who to reach out to, what you need to reach out about when you go to kslegislature or ksleglookup.org. We have a link at the top there online. There'll be a link dropped into chat if it's not already there, to the bills that we talked about tonight and what we're watching. So you'll know the bill numbers there. You didn't have to write them all down. Sign up for action alerts. We talked about, everything that people are doing up here. 6 Degrees, ACLU, Quality Kansas, Loud Light, League of Women Voters in Johnson County. I'd be remiss if I did not mention Planned Parenthood, Great Plains Votes, because we talked about them earlier. Unfortunately, they weren't able to be here. Neither was Trust Women or Urge because of scheduling, but they do have a rally tomorrow at the State House. You can get on the Urge website or on any of their Facebook or Twitter profiles, and you can get the information for that rally. It's to raise awareness about how Kansas chose bodily autonomy, right? So if you can, please participate with that tomorrow. And I'd like to thank our friends over in Wyandotte County who are doing some of the same work that we're doing, Voter Rights Network of Wyandotte County. We held a similar forum with them over in Wyandotte the other night. I think that's it. I think that I'm going to let you all go home and everyone online can click off, but I do see a question back here.
About the value of the content, people other than your representative environment are very fortunate situation. Is there value in contacting others?
There's always, I'll repeat the question. So is there value in contacting a legislator?
I think I leave.
Oh, you want that one? Okay, let me ask you then. Eileen. Is there any value in contacting legislators that do not represent you? So I happen to be lucky that both of my legislators vote the way that is this right? Is what you said. That vote the way I would like them to. Should I reach out to legislators outside my district?
It depends.
Thank you for that answer. I could not have done it.
To give you some context, those people are in office to represent a very specific population, their voters. And so they're going to listen to their voters. I cannot tell you the number of times I have sat in a legislator's office and they have complained about this person, this advocacy group, that advocacy group, emailing them when they're not in their district. It can be incredibly annoying to them and it can have the opposite impact, especially if it's a very hot button issue. Well, this person isn't in my district. Why should I listen to them? And why should I listen to anyone else who thinks like that? However, there are certain situations where it is appropriate. If that legislator is on a committee that is hearing a bill that you are interested in, you can absolutely send them an email. If you are an expert in some capacity or in some way able to speak to the bill, are you a parent and this is something that impacts your children? Are you a provider of healthcare to gender nonconforming and trans children? Are you sick and tired of the legislature? I mean, in that case, you know, just reach out to your specific representative or senator. I will say, you can always reach out to any legislator and say thank you. And actually, I highly encourage it. Recently, my sister, who is the mother of a trans daughter, who I'm fighting for every day at the State House right now, she reached out to the Republicans who voted against the anti-trans bills, specifically to say thank you and to explain how important it is to our family and how scary this has been for us, and that knowing there are people fighting against this is important. And that legislator then reached out to me and said, hey, do you have a sister with the same last name? And it made his day. It helped him in his resolve. So it's a complicated answer. Majority of the time, just reach out to your legislator and give them support, give them props, etc. When committees are back in session, feel free to give testimony, make them listen to you by providing written testimony or oral testimony. And then when people make the right decisions, even if they're not in your district, please thank them, because it's really rough up there for legislators and lobbyists and everyone else.
Thank you, and I will add really quickly, that's why you'll see, oh, sorry. I just want to say, I will add really quickly, that's why you'll see when we send out action alerts or anyone up here sends out action alerts, usually you're typing in your address, right? You're putting in your address so that it pulls up your legislators, and you're not just blindly emailing or contacting all of the legislators, because as Eileen said, you know, sometimes it's overwhelming and sometimes they use that against us. Karen?
I will add that this session, I have been encouraging people, especially with the education issues, to, well, first of all, every legislator I ever hear from says they still want to hear from you. So still send an email. But I have also been encouraging people to copy leadership on both the House and the Senate. So copying the Senate Majority Leader and the Senate Minority Leader. So they're also seeing all the emails that are coming through, and then on the House side as well. And you can find those that contact information out on the website. And I mean, I know from that last regular day of the regular session, when they were making those changes to the budget and to the K-12 budget that were just, you know, kind of shocking and surprising. It was really helpful. Like, I think Dinah was sitting there and her, you know, she saw her computer, she's the Senate Minority Leader, saw her emails just coming in. So leadership is seeing, you know, what people are out there saying, and they get a sense of what they're you know, their whatever you want to call them.
Thank you, that's great.
Yeah. And then my other thing, it would be, that's when you think of your friends who don't live in your area. That's the whole kind of point of why I started what I did, because my legislators are doing just what I want them to. So I rely on my friends to contact those.
That's a great point. Thank you very much. Relational, right? It's all relation. Politics is relational. Advocacy is relational. And so I'm really grateful for the relationships that, you know, we have up here and out there and out there as well. So thank you so much for being here. I'd be remiss if I did not thank profusely Debbie Kitchen and Marie Hernandez for really taking this event and bringing it to the next level, and for Jane Moyer for they're learning the ropes, right? And he did an amazing job learning the ropes with this and putting it together. So thank you to everybody. Thank you so much to League of Women Voters volunteers that are here this evening helping out. And of course, to everybody who's watching online and who showed up in person. Like I said, we can't do this without you. We don't want to do this without you. We need to. Thank you in advance for contacting your legislators on the issues that matter to you. And we'll see you next time.